everyone. Welcome to the Dyson Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Dyson, and today I am joined by Josh Stranathan, I believe is how you say your last name, or at least close to it. I know your last name for me is a little bit difficult, but Josh and I are actually both Maxwell Leadership certified trainers and coaches. And interestingly enough, we met at a virtual post Maxwell conference Zoom call. So of all things, we're on this call with probably, I think it was over 100 people, and they split us up into breakout rooms. And there were about 4 or 5 of us, I believe, that were in there. And that was just something that connected me to Josh. I connected with everybody in the room. I tried to write down their name, connect with them on LinkedIn. But as far as any kind of follow-up, interacting with them on social media, LinkedIn, anything, Josh is one of the only ones that I've stayed that way. He sometimes will post some short videos, some interesting posts, different thoughts, and I've enjoyed catching that. So was excited to reach out and be able to confirm to have Josh on with us for a podcast interview. So Josh, please say hello to our podcast audience today.
Well, Nick, thanks. Hey, everybody. Glad and grateful to be here. Nick, I think from the very beginning, is one of the things that caught me on the Zoom call was his smile. Because you know how in certain Zoom calls, people leave their videos off, and then you kept your video on, and you were engaged, and you were upbeat. And so I already tell there was something unique about you. And for me, I just love people. Yeah. I just love people. Like, it drives my kids nuts because I talk to everybody. And they're like, Dad, it's just a grocery clerk, or Dad, it's just a trash person. And I'm like, but you never know. And so that was kind of one of those moments with you and I on that Zoom call. And I'm like, and then you requested me on LinkedIn, like during the call. And I was like, oh, this guy has initiative. I'm all about initiative. So I'm stoked to be here today and to see where our conversation goes.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And even I'm the same. I love people, interacting with people. My sister is an extreme introvert, and that used to drive her crazy when we would hang out together as we were growing up. Could be at a coffee shop, and like a barista would come on break and stand behind me in line, and we'd be talking the whole time we were in line, the whole time we were waiting on drinks and everything else. And she goes, "Have you met them before?" No, I have no clue who they are. I'm just striking up conversations. So that's that. I'm the same way. So
Awesome.
Really looking forward to it. So Josh, as we're getting started and going to be chatting with you today, why don't you share with our audience a little bit about what you do? We're both Maxwell Leadership trainers, but a lot of our trainers and coaches, they have different niche markets, different strategies, different things they do. So specifically for you, what is your focus and your audience that you work with, and what kind of things are you currently doing?
That's a great question, Nick. So currently I am so part of the Maxwell Leadership team's training, consulting, and speaking for DISC, which is the DISC model. And so I'm a trainer consultant for that, help individuals and teams. But the other component is that I have a 9-to-5. And so that's the beautiful thing about the Maxwell Leadership team is it can be all in, it can be your everything, or it can be a complement to help you grow and develop yourself. And then you can share that and develop people as you do to both and kind of approach. And so 9-to-5, I have a sales job that I do. I'm an IT hardware consultant and trainer, as well as speaker, as well as salesperson for a company called STS Education. And then Maxwell Leadership, I train and develop teams, individuals, coaches. My whole goal, though, is very similar to Maxwell's, where you're a person of value that adds value to others. And I think for me, it's just how do we help others really develop themselves, whether it's intentional, they pay you for it, or it's unintentional through questions and time. And I do a lot of that all the time. So it's kind of a little bit, my niche market happens to be teams with communication issues. That's the niche market. But then I also help individual males. Like that's something we can talk about probably another podcast, but that's the gist of it.
Sure, absolutely. And that way, me and you are very similar in what we do, because I work a day job, and my Maxwell Leadership training, my speaking training business is in addition to what I do day to day. And that is one of the cool benefits of the Maxwell Leadership program is I've had that opportunity. For me, it's not the 9-to-5. For me, it's a weird schedule that I only work 4 days a week. So Friday for me is wide open for the most part, which is why a lot of times like we're recording on a Friday. So definitely a nice thing in that regard. But for me, I come from a background in human resources. So that actually is more of my niche market personally, as I deal with a lot of human resources because I live in their world. And training and development is one of the purviews of them. So that's kind of a great combination for myself. But it's interesting, a couple things that you said, and I want to kind of let you elaborate a little bit. So you referenced the DISC profiles. I'm familiar with those as an offering. I've done the DISC assessments. I've done them both short and the long versions of those. But for those that are here on the podcast that maybe are not familiar with what that DISC is or kind of what the process is, could you maybe just elaborate a little further on what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you asking. So the DISC it's a communication tool is basically what it is. You might have heard of the Myers-Briggs or the Strength Finders. Those are all personality skill set testing that have been tested and approved. DISC is more of a, D stands for dominant. It's very direct. So we all might know somebody in their communication style who is very direct to the point. And then I stands for influencing or inspirational. And you think about those who are inspiring. Like you think about people who have a personality and they just people gravitate to them. And then the S is steady and very the same. And you've got those people in your lives. And then the C stands for complacent and usually more of a rule follower, more of a detailed person, analytics. And so it just helps you understand how you communicate. And then what DISC does is it teaches you how you like to be communicated and then how to communicate to everybody else who's different than you. And so the DISC profile, the DISC assessment, it gives a really good job. And Maxwell Leadership does its own little spin on it, and it's really well done. I have seen teams come to life. I've seen people who don't get along start getting along or start understanding a little bit more of their point of view. And so that's where the thriving is. And then you help leaders and bosses and managers help them understand their employees. Like it's a whole different game-changing atmosphere. Nothing perfect, but it's a really well done tool. And so it's fun to facilitate that and to offer that as a solution through Maxwell.
Absolutely. And I know it's on my list to add to kind of my repertoire of what I can offer to my clients. But currently that's something I actually have another coach with Maxwell that's here in the area that if I need that, he's my go-to person that can do it in the meantime. So that's one other cool thing with Maxwell Leadership. We're all about collaboration and working together, which is amazing when you take people that are entrepreneurs trying to run their own business, doing their own things, but yet we can still collaborate on podcasts. We can work together in our businesses and help each other out, which is just so much fun. So Josh, the next question I'll let you kind of think through and walk our audience through, but tell me a little bit about your leadership journey, because something like Maxwell Leadership, for the most part, is not something we just accidentally step into. It's not something that we just wake up one day and Google leadership training and we become a leadership trainer. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I know for my journey, that's at the time I signed up for Maxwell Leadership, it was about 10, 11 years in the making to even get to that point. So share with our audience today a little bit about what your journey looked like.
I don't know if we have enough time to start that conversation, but
short version.
Short version. Yeah. So, long story short, I've always loved people, but about 6 or 7 years ago, it might have been a little longer, somebody suggested that I have the ability that people will tell me things. Like I'll just be in, like you said, your barista story. We talked about that briefly and how in the past, and people will just come up and share stuff with me. And so then it really started me understanding that I like to listen to people, and then people telling me things, and then people like to listen to me. And so one of my buddies at one point in time was like, you should probably do some leadership training. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then somebody, John says all the time, Maxwell says all the time, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so when that really did start clicking in me, it was like, oh, well, maybe I am a leader, but not like I've been led. And so what's it mean to be led well? And then I'm a faith person. Faith is very big in my life. And so because of being a faith-driven person, I started searching people that are faith-driven in their leadership styles. And Maxwell's name popped up like 6 or 7 different times.
Right.
And at the time, I was registered for a conference. It was like a growth personal development conference in Vegas, of all places. And Maxwell happened to be there at the conference. And so that's when things really started kind of like falling together for me. And that was probably 2018, 2019, something like that. And I just drank the Kool-Aid, Nick. I was like, everything Maxwell. I'm like, I'm signing in. I'm jumping at both feet. My wife's like, what are you doing? Who are you? And it was really great. And then here's the fun thing about the Maxwell community. as soon as you step foot into an international Maxwell conference, or as soon as you step foot on a call, or like our Zoom call we talked about, it is so infectious in the best way. Everybody wants you to win. And so then I was like, yeah, this is great. Now you've got to do it reasonably and wisdom, and you got to put stewardship in it. But so it's interesting. Sometimes I still don't consider myself a leader. I just like helping people. So that's a little bit of my leadership journey with Maxwell. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And there's an element of that. Like I come from a faith background, faith community as well. And that's a big part of who I am. And for me, it very similar where people are talking about your ability to connect with people. They open up, share things with you. For me, it was more of the teaching aspect of it, where I was teaching in churches and in a church setting. And I'm sitting as a teenager who is teaching to senior adults, and people are saying, you're bringing things to life and making sense and giving practical applications to people that are 30 and 40 years older than you. You know, you've got this gift of teaching. You're able to really bring this out and really make people think. You know, have you thought about becoming a college professor or a teacher or a pastor and all of these things? And I never felt called into the ministry to lead a church by any means. Mm-hmm. But I very much started getting the outlook as I got older and started realizing that anytime you impact and influence people, it is an element of ministry because you are influencing and impacting their lives. And so for me, that was kind of an eye-opening moment that even if I don't ever lead a church, and that's something that God never calls me to do, I can still lead and influence people wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing, and can help them with their life and what they're dealing with, what they've got going on. So in that instance, people were telling me, oh, consider teaching, consider impacting people with speaking and that kind of thing. And for me, it was a mixed journey because I was getting some people encouraging, some people not, that were telling me you need way more experience and everything else. So it's kind of that up and down type of journey. But I know it's really tough in balancing and keeping things focused in that regard.
And you know what's interesting? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
You know what's really interesting about that is we all have our own stories. Like every person, 7-8 billion, however many people are on this planet Earth today in 2024, we all have our own stories. And a lot of times we don't take time to slow down enough and understand our stories. And our stories have value. Here's the crazy thing, Nick, and this is why I love this conversation. I'm really grateful we're having it, is that we're all born. And at some point, we start believing messages about ourselves. We start believing messages about our stories. And part of my story is I believed a message that I didn't have value, that I didn't matter. But I had this conflicting story, or as my friend John Acuff says, he says, it's a talk track. What's that called? A talk track and a tape. So you have this self-talk track that you're telling yourself. And it's very detrimental, or it's negative, or it's toxic. And you just tell yourself, and if you tell yourself enough, you'll start living out of that story. But yet inside, I've got this message of like, no, people matter. No, I matter. And so all of these conversations and this conflicting message, and then eventually life happens and you have these experiences. And that's what Maxwell Leadership does. It creates experiences for people to really understand, no, your story matters and you have value, and somebody in the world needs to hear your value. And that's why I love talking about this, because I'll never look at anybody else the same. No matter if I hate you or hated you or whatever it may be, or we're cross with each other. Like the reality is everybody who has breath on this planet has a value and a story. And the more we get to know those stories, the more people, think about a world, Nick. We're just a few more people in leadership, in business, in politics, understood that no matter party you're with or whatever, what your beliefs are, people have value.
Absolutely.
And sorry, I get a little carried away sometimes. I apologize.
You're good. You're good. And I completely agree. Leadership, I know John Maxwell says it, that he's leadership sad. And I know for many of us, we can look at kind of the culture, the landscape, what's going on. There's a gap in leadership. And I know some of us, like me and you, we're doing what we can in our area, our little corner of the world. People like John Maxwell have the opportunity for more international, global impact. And we're doing what we can, where we can, as much as we can, to try to make that difference. Another Another topic I want to get to and talk about some for today as well is, I know both of us come from a faith background, but I know one thing me and you talked about before the podcast was some conversations around family, balanced family, and that kind of thing. So share with the audience a little bit, because you're working a 9 to 5, you're trying to do some leadership training on the side. I know you've got family, you're balancing a lot. So what are some things that you could share with other leaders, other professionals, other people who are in the same boat? They're balancing a lot, they're dealing with a lot, trying to balance the work, the family, and leading all of these different areas of their life. What's some things that you've learned along the way that you think could help them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a couple things. So I have 5 kids ranging from 20 to 4. And it's a blast. At 20, my son's birthday is today. He's 19 today, and then 16 in July, 6 in July, and then my youngest just turned 4 a few weeks ago. And so you're right, Nick. There's a tension there. I think one of the things that's really clear about time is we don't get to decide how much we have of it, right? Like, it's just finite. You got it, and that's it. And nobody knows if tomorrow's promised. That's what we're talking about. Like, nobody knows if tomorrow's promised. And the reality of it is so it's like, I got 24 hours. I got today. Now, there are a lot of things that help me clarify, and I hope somebody hears this, what I should be doing versus what I could be doing. And so first thing that helps me clarify that is my values. What are the values? What are the most important things in my life? Is it my faith? Is it my family? Is it my friends? They happen to all start with F. I don't know why, but that just works, you know? And so you got to figure out the order of your value, like what's most important to you, because here's the natural thing. Craig Rochelle says we as people naturally gravitate and we move towards our strongest thought. And so what if I'm thinking about the most? Am I thinking about money? Am I thinking about time with my family? Am I thinking about time with my kids? Am I thinking about serving my boss? Whatever it may be, that's what you naturally gravitate to. And so for me, it gets really clear. And then here's the other thing about that. Once I'm clear on my values, I share them with my wife, and then I share them with a few close friends and say, look, I need you to keep me in check, because I'm a yes guy and I love to help so many people. And so I can quickly say yes. Like, I remember the pastor who I told I was marrying my wife, this is 12 years ago, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, Josh, that's so good. And I was like, I know why it's good, but why do you say that? He goes, because you say yes to everything, and she's going to help you slow down and say no. And so that's the other thing too, I would say, is that no is a good word. Like, you can say no with value and love and respect. But so many people are afraid to say no in this world today. And hear me now, wherever you are, please hear me. No is a complete sentence. Or no thank you is a kind complete sentence.
Yes.
So
And
does that make sense?
it does. And I'm so glad you said that phrase, because I've heard it a few times recently. And I love that you brought it out to the phrase that no is a complete sentence, because we are in very much a society that it's all about being busy, doing more. Can you achieve? Can you climb the corporate ladder? Can we do and do and do? And it's just add all of these things onto it, when we're sacrificing family and friends and those close relationships. It could be sacrificing, for people like us who are have a strong faith background. Is it sacrificing time for our faith or time with our church community? What are we sacrificing when we're saying yes to everything, because we are on finite time? And when we do get into saying yes, it's I even had the conversation this morning in a leadership training I was doing, that everything you do has trade-offs. That when you take on something new, something else is going to lose spot or time or attention or focus. And likewise, if you give up something bad, you can replace it with something good. But equally so, if you can take on something bad and it replace something good. And you've got to be careful to what you say yes to. And so that's so good and so important. Also, like the fact that you talked about that when you have something that's core value or something that you're pursuing, something that you're looking at, you share it with your wife and you're focused on that. I know that's something a lot of times I do as well. When I'm trying to build my business, my brand, and things that I'm doing, I'll talk to my wife and say, I've got this idea. What are your thoughts if I do this? and
Yes.
try to bounce it off, because if I'm going to do it, she's right here with me. That's my partner. And she's going to have to deal with the stress or the positive, the negative, whatever comes from it. And so, that's something we have to talk through. But I think a lot of people don't do that so much. So
Well,
I'll toss it back to you, and I want you to kind of build on that a little more for our audience of that kind of connection.
oh my. Gosh. So let's just say, I don't know if it's Greg Rochelle, John Maxwell. Somebody says fail fast and fail forward. And so the only way you do that is if you make a lot of mistakes. And so the one reason is like, again, I don't know everything. I've only been married for 11 years. This is my second marriage. And that's a story for another day for sure. But what I can tell you is that, like, I don't like having days where my wife and I are not on the same page. Like, and one of
Right.
my values is to get on the same page as quickly as possible. Now, that might require me admitting something that I was off or I was wrong, or admitting I was selfish, or admitting that, like, I didn't have her best interests in mind, or I didn't think about her interests. And so it's a lot of communicating, right? It's a lot of question asking. Hey, when you said this, so years ago, before we got married, Nick, we went through a premarital workshop, and part of the premarital workshop was communication skills. And I think Michael and Nancy Bryant were the communication leaders at that time, and they did this weird exercise called mirroring. Have you ever heard of it?
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure it's the same
Right.
as what you're doing.
So it goes like this. So it says, and again, this is a communication skill. It's just all it is, because everything is really related to communication, because what you say might not be what they heard. Again, how powerful is the DISC mentality if you understand what this is? So that's why I'm so passionate about it. So that goes like this. It says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. Is now a good time? And then you would say yes or no. And then I would share, say, hey, the other day, Nick, when you said this, I heard this. Is that what you meant? And then you would repeat back to me what I just said. And you would do that exercise back and forth just so that there was clarity, so that it can be completely open. And you do it in as much of a monotone manner as you can. And so my wife and I have been doing that for years, and it is tweaked a little bit and changed a little bit, and we use little short word phrases now. But I want to make sure she's involved, because everything that I do, like you were saying, the trade-offs earlier, like everything that I do affects those around me so much. And if I don't know how that affects them, so I've been choosing to do some more intense exercises in the last 3 years. So I've done some triathlons, I've done a marathon. And when I sign up for those, it's all great reasons. It's all great reasons. But what I don't think about when I sign up for those is the cost of time it costs my family. Like, some of the training is 4 to 6 hours at a time. The training. And so I'm gone on a Saturday. If I even have to leave 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I'm still going until 9 a.m. Like, that's a big chunk of time. And then there's recovery. And I never thought about that. And this is why I said, like, for me, again, this is all stuff people have taught me and trained me, and I'm still learning to get better at. If she is the most important earthly relationship to me, my wife, then it ought to be a part of the conversation about what I say to do with my time. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely. And I know it's the same for me. Anything that I sign up for or agree to do, there's the consideration of, how does this impact our time? Because, again, in our instances, we're working a day job, and then we're doing additional things on the side, whether that's, in your instance, training, if it's doing leadership training, communication training, that kind of thing. It's going to take time. That's that free time or time potentially from your wife or your kids, and it's
Yeah.
going to impact in that way. I think it's
The other thing,
really
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting when you talk about mirroring and going through that exercise. I've heard of a couple different exercises called mirroring. I haven't heard that one in like a communication style necessarily, but I think that's actually really valuable, because there's a lot of times, I know in, I believe it's the book Love and Respect, they actually talk about people hearing things like the blue lens versus pink lens. I forget how it's
Yeah.
exactly phrased, but
It's
it's that
so
thing
good.
where we can say one thing and it's not perceived the other. And that happens in the work setting as well, where you can say something to somebody and it's not perceived the way that you meant it. That especially happens in family, between kids or a spouse, and so on. So that's very good.
So the two things, thank you for that. Two things there. People say good intentions never helped anybody. So your intentions with what your words are saying could be amazing, but unless you clarify what they heard, you have really no idea what they heard. And so your intentions go, I didn't mean that. It's like, okay, I know you didn't mean it, but you said it this way. Or it's not, maybe that phrase, it's not what you said, it's how you said it, which again, we can be unaware of. The other thing I'd say is that when it comes to, I lost it. It was something about trade-offs. That's all right. If it comes back, we'll bring it back up. Don't worry about it.
For sure. I know even for me, just kind of an example of what you're talking about as well is I may say something or my wife say something and the other person doesn't perceive it the way that it was meant. And then you start to get some hostility, some frustration because why did that come up? Why did you say it that way? Why did your face say this or your facial expressions have this? And you start to kind of have that disrupt. And then it spirals if you never get to a place where you can actually stop and circle back. And so many times, and I'm guilty of this 100%, in the moment, emotions running high or you're getting frustrated, it's hard to just kind of stop and reset in those moments. And I think any of us, we struggle with that for sure. But communication in family is so important. And even beyond that, I think you could probably take a couple minutes and even touch on this communication with children, because I've seen it from kind of reflecting back my experience with my relationship to my parents, my wife's relationship to her parents, and then seeing other people around us. Since we are younger people, a lot of our friends are having kids and are raising kids, have toddlers. And so we're kind of looking and seeing this different dynamic, and we're seeing how different parenting styles, different communication styles with the parents, and you can see how that's impacting kids. So do you have any thoughts as far as communication with children in that instance?
I hope my kids get to hear this one day. We can talk about it for sure. Because it's interesting. Like, you're not the same person you were. Like, so how long have you and your wife been married? Sorry.
We actually just celebrated 2 years.
Oh, congratulations. When was your anniversary?
As May 21st.
We got married on the 18th. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great month to get married.
Absolutely.
So communication with kids, I think it varies based off the age and the season. But it's really interesting. There's a great book called Boundaries. Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend wrote this book, and they've written several different spinoffs since: Boundaries with Kids, Boundaries with Adult Kids, Boundaries with Step Kids. So my wife and I are a blended family. So Karen didn't have any kids before we got married, and I had 3 from our previous marriage, and now we have 5. So we have 2 together and then 3, so 5. So communication is even more interesting in a blended family and a smart step family. But in the book Boundaries, it's really powerful when he defines what a boundary is. And I'll tell a real quick story. He says in the first part of the book, his parents come in and they're bringing Dr. Henry Cloud as a psychologist, and they're like, "You got to help us with our son. You got to help us with our son. He's off the rails. He's crazy." And they're like, "Well, tell me what's going on. What happened?" And they're like, "Well, he's drinking, he's smoking, he's doing all these things, and he's coming home, he's not working." And he's like, "Well, I don't think your son has a problem." And I'm like, "What? No, we just told you all the problems he has." He's like, "No, you haven't given him a problem. You're taking care of everything for him. You need to establish a boundary which defines where you stop and he starts." And I think that's the component of communication, especially with the kids, because how often do we get so flustered for what we're thinking or what we're feeling, and then we don't even hear the kids complain or they hear the kids request, whether they're 4 years old, 14 years old, or 22 years old. It's our agenda that gets in the way of the communication. And it's like, well, how do I stop? Take a few breaths. What's really being requested here in this communication conversation? Okay, you want to borrow the car. Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. Okay, so you want more dessert. Okay, let's talk about that. See how it's transferable? But you've got to figure out, like, is this a me thing? Or is this a what do they need in this moment thing? Like, I instituted date nights with my older kids years ago just so I could have an intentional one-on-one time with them to give them whatever they needed, whenever they wanted it, like not material stuff, but whether it's emotional or spiritual. So as far as communication with kids goes, it really comes down to asking the right questions. Like, there's this powerful question, and as a faith person, I didn't use it. I didn't come up with it. It was Jesus. He approached the disciples and approached some people, and he's like, "What do you want?" Like, it's such a deep question, but so simple. So when kids have communication, it's like, what do you really want? Is what you're doing right now helping you get what you want? Okay, you want more time on the game, but you just threw the controller at me. Is that the same thing? But it's slowing down enough to know is this a me thing? And again, like you said, emotions flare. Does that make sense, Nick? Am I just
Yeah.
rambling or does that make
No,
sense?
it makes sense. And that's really good. And I've even, I've studied, I love communication. Outside of leadership, communication is by far my favorite topic to study and read about. And there was even a book, you're probably familiar with like the 5 love languages. I feel like
Dr.
that's a
Gary
very
Chapman. Yeah.
that's a very popular thing. So there was another one that was the love languages of teenagers that he wrote and went
Hmm.
through. And so I read the book just at one point just because I was curious, because a lot of people complain about raising teenagers, dealing with teenagers and all of that. And I'm like, I'm just curious, what does, Dr. Chapman have to say, and how does he deal with it? One of the most interesting things that he brought out in that book that stood out to me was that teenagers are approaching adulthood. They are becoming young adults. And a lot of times parents want to still treat them like they're children when they need to start teaching them, training them, and helping them step into that next stage of life, becoming young adults, where they do still need those boundaries. That's still very much a thing, but they also need to understand the why. They're not just a child you can tell no. They're now becoming a young adult. They need to understand this is why this matters, and this is why this is important. And then also give them responsibility that grants them permission to do additional things. That if you work for this, then you get a reward, because that's adult life. You work to earn money. You train your body to do marathons or triathlons. There's work that goes into the reward and the outcome that you're working towards. So you have to start, at that age when they're changing stages of life, help them navigate what that is to become a successful young adult.
What was that book called again?
I believe it was just the 5 love languages of teens by Gary Chapman. So
I never heard that one, but I love that. That's great. And it's such a powerful concept because, like, again, if we help them see they have value, then it can change the dynamic of the conversation versus I'm the boss, you need to listen to me. I'm in charge, you need to listen to me. I know better. And it's like a good friend of mine who's had a couple teenagers right now, and she says all the time, she's like, what would it look like if you as the plural went first versus waiting for a teenager who doesn't have a frontal cerebral cortex to process, develop, to go first? It's like, oh, they need to know they were wrong. And it's like, really? Like, how do you have a conversation? And I think that's the dialogue that doesn't happen. Like you said, the why is missing. Like, there's so much about that. And if we help the kids realize this sooner, how much difference would the world be today?
absolutely.
Mentality,
Absolutely. Well, Josh, we are coming near the end of our time, and got just a couple wrap-up questions. I know this has been fantastic conversation. I feel like me and you could sit on here and record for like 2 hours and just keep talking and be perfectly fine, but I don't know if people would want to listen to a 2-hour podcast, so we'll have to cut it a little short. But I do have a couple wrap-up questions for you, just so you can interject a couple final things here for the podcast listeners. So first off, leaders are readers. And I know pretty much anybody I'm going to talk to on here, they're going to have books that they're reading, going through things that they're interested in. So what are a couple key books that have either marked your life or you feel like are just absolutely must reads that you recommend to people?
It's a hard question. You'd be interested to know this, Nick. I had never read a book cover to cover until I was 25 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So growing up, I just didn't really like reading, and I much preferred to conversate with people and go out and play. Must reads, I would say there's a book called The Power of a Whisper by Bill Hybels. Phenomenal book. If you're looking for ways to put margin in your life or how to hear the Lord closer or more, whatever, if you're a faith person. The other book is Good to Great by Jim Rohn. It's a great book. A lot of practical. Gosh, I'm going Atomic Habits. Great book.
Love Atomic Habits. It's a great book.
Oh my gosh, such a great book. I think I read that book every year. One of my all-time favorites right now is called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell.
I have it sitting here beside me.
It's a great book. And then I've read a book by, what's his name? John Ortberg. If you want to walk on the water, you got to get out of the boat, which was great. And recently, it's interesting you asked this question. I've just recently been turned on to some fictional books. I've never been a fictional reader, but Charles Martin wrote a series of 3 novels called Water Keeper, The Letter Keeper, and The Record Keeper. I mean, I could not put these books down. Like, they were phenomenal reads. And so if you're looking for something fun to read, but yet really good, The Water Keeper, The Letter Keeper, and The Record Keeper by Charles Martin. So what about you? What would be an all-time read for you?
Oh, man. Definitely Atomic Habits. That's pretty high up on my list. And another one that's a pretty consistent read for me. I read it pretty close to every year. Sometimes I may wait a couple, but I've probably read it 4 times in the last 6 years, is the 15 Laws of Growth by John Maxwell, just because I'm constantly challenging myself of, am I still on my plan? Am I still growing? Am I still doing what I need to do? It's just a good reflection, look back. And, now being a Maxwell leadership coach, I just taught it as a professional development setting for the or session for the college that I work at. So it gave me an opportunity. I went and read it, and it was my study in prep for facilitating that for our group. So even there, that's one that's pretty high up on my list. So Josh, one other thing as we wrap up, one key bit of information or leadership or communication advice, something that you could just leave our audience with, whether that's leadership, communication, what is one key life advice that you could give them?
Ask more questions.
Oh, that's so good.
Ask more questions. I can't tell you, people have questions, but they don't ask them. It's like, no, just ask it. Even if you have to preface it with, hey, this might sound silly, I'm curious. Because I can't remember who said it, and I wish I knew, so I could give credit to it, but they said everything we want in life, Nick, is on the other side of the right question. We got to find out what the question is first. That's the reality. Sorry, this is not supposed to be calling right now.
You're good.
And so that's, I would say, ask more questions. If you got a question, just ask it. You'll never regret asking the question. You will regret not having asked the question.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. That is spot on. Josh, I really appreciate the conversation. This has been fantastic. For those that are listening, something that I'll do is I will link to the books we talked about in the description of this. So if you're interested, you want to go find those, you can. Josh, for somebody that wants to reach out, connect with you, maybe they're looking for some communication training, the DISC training, or finding out more about you, what's some way that people could reach out and connect with you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the best way to get a hold of me. Website's on there as well as anything else in my message. I even think my phone number's on there. I don't know anymore. I get calls from people all this time. So
sure, and I'll link those in the podcast, the YouTube, everything. Wherever you're watching this, listening to this podcast, check the description. That will be there as well. You can track down Josh and reach out and connect with him as well. Josh, again, this has been fantastic conversation. We could probably easily go for another hour and not exhaust what we have to talk about, but I've enjoyed this conversation. We might have to have you on for a round 2 at some point, but this has been fantastic. I just want to thank you for being on with us today.
It's an honor to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And Nick, I am stoked to see your leadership growth, man. It has been so fun, and I can't wait to sit down and have dinner and talk about the journey and meet your wonderful bride. So it'll be a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to that as well. So for my listeners, be sure to check out the description for that information that I mentioned. New episodes are being posted every week on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, social media. Be sure to connect with me, connect with any of my guests that I have on, subscribe, like, share, rate, all that fun stuff with the podcast. Be sure to get this out to people that it can add value to them beyond just my reach. I need your help as well. So join us as we continue this podcast. Thank you for being part of the Dyson Leadership Podcast, and hope you join me again next week for another episode.